morning. Before I start, may I request everyone to switch off their mobile phones or put it on silent mode. Honorable Member of Parliament, Professor Subramanian Swamy, respected Vice Chancellor, Ambassador Sanjay Singh, Sir, Ms. Sagarika Ghosh, members of the faculty, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I must thank you all for joining us for the launch of this book on India's Saudi policy. Before we proceed further, may I request Meenakshi to kindly give a small memento from us to Professor Subramanian Swamy.
It's a map of JNU.
To our Vice Chancellor, Sir. Sanjay Singh. And to Ms. Sagarika Ghosh from Parliament. It is indeed a matter of great pleasure and an honor that this book is being launched here in JNU. Not only because both me and Sir, JNU is our alma mater, but also because when the idea of this book was conceived, I was still a student of JNU, and it took us almost a year from then when the idea was conceived to do the initial research and to get the first draft. And from then on, we further collected some more material. It was not easy because there is very less material available in the public domain and a lot of things are still confidential. And finally, by mid-2018, we could get the manuscript, and thanks to Sagarika and her team at Palgrave Macmillan in Delhi, that we could get the book in a matter of weeks. Personally, for me, it was a very rewarding journey and a learning experience. It is my first authored or co-authored book, and I hope both of us, the authors, hope that you will also enjoy reading the book and you will find it worthwhile. With these few words, I would now request the respected Vice Chancellor to take over the proceedings and say a few words. Over to you, sir.
Dr. Subramanian Swamy, my colleagues from JNU and the students, a very warm welcome to you. Now, Dr. Swamy was my senior colleague at IIT Delhi. He was a professor there even before I joined there. But however, let me say a couple of words because I know Dr. Kumaraswamy since the time I have joined here. He is an expert on Israel and he has done some great work, and the result of which we are seeing it in the form of this book today. But however, we all know that the countries in our maritime neighborhood on the western coast of India and India had ties perhaps going back into ancient times with the traders across this region moving and interacting. In fact, some of these traders settling down in southern India. However, with the birth of Pakistan, with religious identity as its main focus, the situation changed because Pakistan started influencing the Muslim world, including the Gulf nations. And that put a lot of strain on India's foreign policy. In fact, during 70s and 80s, India had to put all its energies to counter the Pakistani propaganda. But however, with the end of Cold War and the breakup of USSR, we had a new reality. And at the same time, India's energy concerns and the oil-rich countries in the Gulf region and their policy of looking east to expand their own oil markets, it brought the countries in the Gulf region and India closer with a main focus on trade and bilateral commercial relations which has isolated Pakistan and weakened Pakistan. And we have also seen since Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over his visits to these countries and the joint statements that came up during these visits, it made very clear that Pakistan is behind the cross-border terrorism and religious radicalism. So, to a larger extent, during the last few years, we are able to isolate Pakistan. And I am very glad that Professor Kumaraswamy has written this wonderful book. We hope that efforts such as this will bring the countries in the Gulf region, including Saudi Arabia and India, closer so that we can continue to live in a peaceful world. With those few words, I request Dr. Kumaraswamy to take over and conduct the meeting.
Respected Vice Chancellor, Honorable Shri Swamy, my colleagues, Ambassador Sanjay Singh, Sagarika Ghosh, friends, experts, and most importantly, the students who are the inspiring force for me all these years. More than 3 decades ago, it was Dr. Subramanian Swamy who started my interest in Israel and the wider Middle East. It's in November 1982, he wrote an article in Sunday, which is now defunct, on why India doesn't have relations with Israel and India should change its policy. And you know, like many of us, I also read the article and that is where I was sucked into Israel. And it looks like yesterday, it's 37 years, I have nothing else to do except focus on the wider Middle East. And I think, you know, this is where the whole journey began. A couple of years ago, I met Dr. Swamy at a social gathering. He asked me simply one simple question. Are you writing any book? You know, that was after all the things people have been talking about JNU, and the only thing he thought of asking me was, are you writing a book? And his presence today, I would say, is a sign that his interest in my academic journey all these years. Thank you very much, sir. The book is not about India's bilateral relations with Saudi Arabia. It is how India viewed, understood, and responded to various developments of this kingdom. That is how we try to do it from the beginning. If you look at Indo-Saudi relationship, certain terminologies are very common. Historical relationship, geographical proximity, energy security, Islam, expatriates, trade, remittances. And if you look at very closely, we don't walk the talk. That was the case for a pretty long time. It is not that we have neglected the region. Jawaharlal Nehru visited most of these countries, including Saudi Arabia. The problem was, during that time, India's policy towards the region was Cairo-centric. And therefore, Saudi Arabia became a victim of Nasser's understanding and policy towards the wider region. And this is how the whole thing was happening even under the Cold War, much of the period. India gradually lost its influence, and India was not an economic power until the 1992. The milestone for us was 2001, when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee made a calculated decision to delink Pakistan from India's wider Middle East policy. Until then, we looked at the world only through the Pakistani prism. Vajpayee decided to make a break. The reason was simple. India cannot be aspiring to be a great power while competing with Pakistan on a daily basis. So either you are a South Asian power or an aspiring Asian power. And that was the decision you made the transition. And that is how the relations have evolved since then. And if you look at the Saudi leadership, they often mention India is a friend, Pakistan is a brother. If you are very familiar with the Indian epics and history, I would rather be a friend than a brother. Because friend is a calculated, informed choice. Brother is something you can't control, it is given to you. So if the Saudis see me as a friend, I feel honored in the process. But if you look at it, the real transformation happens, ironically, after Prime Minister Modi took over office. In spite of the thinking or reading by a section of the Indian elite, his attitude towards the Middle East has been accommodative, inclusive, respectful, pragmatic, and above all, realistic. He was not into any moral posturing. He recognizes India as an interest, so he was able to accommodate all these countries. That is why you'll find Israel and Palestine, Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Turkey and Syria. All the countries are actually quoting India in the last 4 years. And there is certain, I would identify 4 broad things and then I will end. Prime Minister Modi has been cultivating the Saudi leadership since the Brisbane summit in 2014. He is using all the G20 meetings to meet the Saudi leadership. And if you look at the state visit in 2017, he has met them 5 times in the last 4 years. That is something remarkable. But this was not in isolation. If you look at it from 2014 till today, the political visits have taken place with all the countries of the Middle East. The only exception was Libya, which is war-torn, where India doesn't have a mission. Otherwise, senior Indian leaders, I'm talking political leaders, have been visiting the entire region. This is something which has not happened since 1947. We have been selectively visiting, a holistic thing was not there. And the third thing was, Modi has been using the earlier contact to transform the relationship from a transactional one to the strategic partnership. If you look at the Indo-Saudi relations, they are talking in terms of joint ventures, Saudi investment in India's strategic oil reserves, petrochemical industry, and possible Indian shares in Aramco, the largest oil company in the world. These are not commercial transactions. These are all strategic decisions which are indicating a greater things. And similarly, India had to compete with a number of new players in the process. China and Russia are a competing power. US is actually declining influence. And Iran is trying to dominate the region, which is going to affect the Indian relationship. If you look at the results, in the last year, India has overtaken France as the 6th largest economy in the world. With Brexit, probably we will be overtaking Britain sometime this year, which means India will be the 5th largest economy in the world. And if you wanted to grow further and have a political ascendance in the process, Saudi Arabia is going to be a key factor in India's foreign policy discourse. I think that is what our submission is going to be. There are enormous challenges for both the countries. And if you look at extremism, extremism is a threat not only to India, but also to Saudi Arabia. That convergence has enabled us to work on a whole range of security issues, and which was completely unimaginable until recently. And both the countries face a number of challenges, hurdles, and everything. And I think I will stop. If you want to know more, over to the book. Thank you very much.
Sorry, no, nothing.
May I now request Dr. Swamy to give his remarks.
Vice Chancellor Professor Kumar, Professor Kumaraswamy and Dr. Kumar, and of course our distinguished diplomat, Mr. Sanjay Singh. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Normally I come in a combative mood to JNU, but this is clearly an academic thing, so I'll deal with ideas. And I'm very happy that you have written a book on Saudi Arabia. And I think you have correctly pointed out that the present government's intention is to go on developing relations with countries like Saudi Arabia. By the way, I must correct you as I'm prone to do. We are not the 6th or 5th largest GDP country, we are 3rd largest. You are still living in the era of using exchange rates to convert GDP. We know more to it. It's based on purchasing power parity, and we are 3rd largest. Of course, per capita wise, we are pretty far down. Now, there is a fundamental difference in approach between defense policy and foreign policy. A distinction which Jawaharlal Nehru didn't make, and that's why he came to grief in 1962. Foreign policy, we just look at the intention of the other countries. And in defense policy, we look at the capacity of different countries. We therefore, if we feel that the Chinese are well disposed towards their intentions are good, we will pursue relations with China. But but at the same time we discover that they are developing their military capacity, we'll try to match that to the extent that we can. So this is a book on foreign policy, so I will not get into the question of how we should regard a country if it goes rogue or turns against us and so on. That's not a issue of concern here. Now, in his book, Professor Kumaraswamy and Kumar have, it is a wonderful library book because he has brought into the book many things which are good from a comparative point of view. All the joint communications have been included in the appendix, and that tells you by reading each one of them the trend that has taken place in our relations with Saudi Arabia. Now, we are now essentially question of how we are looking at the West Asia is in terms not so much of how much oil we can get. That's not our government's approach to the extent I understand it. But it's more an understanding that the world should not end up in a clash of civilizations, and particularly in a clash of religions. We have 3 countries to balance. One is a Sunni Muslim country, that's Saudi Arabia. The other is a Shia Muslim country, Iran. And the third is Israel. And I don't think you can put the 3 of them in one room and not see some bloodshed taking place inside. They are all 3 mutually antagonistic countries. But we have good relations with all of them. And we intend to maintain it with Israel because there is a long history of their support to us, even when we didn't recognize them. In the Indo-Pakistan war, they gave us spares, and in one case, when after the Soviet Union unraveled, we didn't have spares for our T-72 tanks. The Israelis cannibalized the Czechoslovakian T-72 tanks and gave us the spare parts. So Israel has been very strongly supportive of India, whatever their national interest reasons might be, but the fact is they have been supportive. They've been extremely helpful to us in information on terror, and they probably have the best data than anyone else in the world. So our commitment as BJP to Israel is complete and total, and that will not change. In order to improve our relations with any other country, will not dilute our relations with Israel. That's one fundamental principle we have. The second thing is that irrespective of what the United States might think, we will maintain our relations with Iran because Iran is strategically very important for us. We think that if tomorrow we are forced to fill the vacuum in Afghanistan, Iran is an extremely important country for us in terms of moving our supplies and looking after the provisions of the army. And so Iran is a country which we may not, beat our chest about it, of supporting them, but we have very strong commitment to maintain our relations with Iran. Saudi Arabia we thought was a tough nut to crack, because we thought that they being a religious state would not be very accommodative in some of the things we do. We have from time to time a problem which the world perceives as more serious than it really is, and that's the Hindu-Muslim problem. And the Saudi Arabians have expressed concerns to us in private about it. But that was not the reason. We thought that they were so intimately connected with the United States that, and so terribly opposed to Israel, that they would not have good relations with us. But we were totally surprised when they allowed us to fly Air India over Saudi Arabia, which they have not allowed any other country. In fact, we are now being pressed by Israel to persuade the Saudi Arabians to allow El Al to fly over them, because it becomes so much cheaper. And of course, we have not made any attempts. But we hope over the years all these antagonisms will go. But I'm saying that the gesture that Saudi Arabia has made has warmly touched us, and we are now convinced that this is a country with which we can do business both in emotional terms, cultural terms, and so on. We have almost 20 lakh workers in Saudi Arabia, or 1.8 million? So 3.6. My God, I'm out of date. Huh? 2.6. Anyway, it's a large number, and I think the economy of Kerala survives on that. It will otherwise collapse. So, subject to their internal requirements and conditions, most of our people there do not feel unhappy being there, and they've been there for years and years. Many of them, very few come back. So, therefore, we have many other interests also, the economic interests, the oil, etc. But oil, we never know how long it will be a useful item, because the research that is going on at the pace it is going on hydrogen fuel cells and alternative fuels for vehicles and so on. Well, it might be one of these days oil might become, like coal is rapidly becoming, a out-of-date fuel. So how to bring about a balance between these three centers. One is a Jewish center, the other is a Sunni center, and the third is, of course, a Shia center. And we have all three religions in our country, and we want to be friendly with all three. They recently, I must say, I'm very sorry that this Saudi Arabian ambassador is not here. This is Saudar, but I have had many interactions with them. He's one of the smartest diplomats I've seen outside Indian diplomats, of course. But now he and I have talked to very great length, and you would be surprised, as the first person who educated me that in Saudi Arabia they demolish mosques, not unauthorizedly. Nobody has right to unauthorizedly or take a mob and demolish any masjid. But as a government for development work, they are continuously doing that, because he explained to me what the theology of a masjid is in their scheme of things. Of course, there are one or two exceptions like Makkah and perhaps Al-Aqsa. But the general is that in Islamic view, it's a place for congregation and to read namaz, but by itself it's not something that they hold so sacred that it can't be touched. That we have not made it, it's not part of our public idiom, but privately when we speak to Muslim groups and the question of the Ram Janmabhoomi, it's come very, very useful. And a very large number of people privately say, we can't publicly come out and support, but we'll be supportive. So I think even for our internal harmony, countries like Iran, and Iran, of course, the Shias and the rest of India, I mean, particularly the Hindu population, have always had very good relations. You have to visit Lucknow to see how good it is. But as far as the Sunni relationship is, it is because of what happened with creation of Pakistan, it has had a problem. So I'm saying in terms of developing India's stable base, the skill with which we are able to keep all these three countries as friends is going to be extremely important. And there is bilaterally no problem with Iran, there is bilaterally no problem with Israel. Saudi Arabia was the new element, and therefore doing research on it is extremely important for our country. So I would say that therefore we have to, and the impact of this would be that some of the developing events might necessitate using all three countries to help us in meeting that development. One development could be the Americans walking out of Afghanistan, and Iran is has a direct any roadways or railways or whatever access to Afghanistan. I mean, assuming that the hostility with Pakistan will continue, and Iran has become that way also very important. Saudi Arabia has been very helpful to us in secret on terror. They have been extremely helpful, and that's a very big plus for us, because we certainly would like to see that terror, dealing with terror, the religious part is as much separated as possible, and the more Islamic countries help us in this, the more easy it is for us to put it across. So all said and done, I would say that what the projection for us is, if India is to become a global power, we are already in the first three: United States, China, India. The United States is going out from here. They are tired of sending troops to various places. So that leaves us with China and India. And of course, historically, we have had very good relations with China. And I have always been of the view that the animosity that has developed in '62 is a outlier. It's not a part of the general trend. China is extremely important in developing a stable Asia, and therefore we should maintain relations with China by not getting involved in trilateral problems of China. That is, if the United States and China have a problem, we should sort of stay out. And I may tell you a personal anecdote. In 1977, when the Janata came to power, Morarji Desai, one of the most anti-Chinese persons that could be, he became Prime Minister. But for some reason, he had a change of heart, I think. And he knew my interest in China and how much I have studied the country. So he asked me, is there any way we can improve our relations with China? So I said, what do you mean by improvement? He said, at least they should accept that the territory that they have taken away from us is disputed. Because at that time the idiom was that this is part and parcel of China, and they will not yield an inch. So I told him that the only way he could do it is if you help them when they are a bit in difficulty. And he said, what difficulty are there? And I said, there's a river in Russia and China border called Ussuri River. And there's an island there called Janbadao, which the Chinese claim is theirs, and the Russians are ready to go to war for that. So he said, how are we concerned? I said, we are concerned because we have an Indo-Soviet treaty. And that says that if Russia gets into a war situation, we have to help them. And they've already made a request to allow them to send their troops into India and go to Tibet from below as a contingency. So you should say no, and the Chinese should know that you have said no. So he said, but we are non-aligned. I said, yes, but you got this treaty. He said, but that treaty was was done by Mrs. Gandhi, what we have got to do with it? He said, you tell the Chinese that. So he asked me to go to China. That's how my first initiative of going to China, later on getting Kailash Manso open. So in a sense, since then, whatever commitments the Chinese have made, including not interfering in any movement in Assam, which was made in my meeting with Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese have kept it. I was recently in Northeast, and I asked our Air Force people, do you see any Chinese planes flying into our? He said, not one case there. They have never violated our airspace. So I think the Chinese would be a very stable friend for us, provided we know how to deal with them. And the Middle East is an extraordinarily important area, and in this the three main players are these, and we have got now relations with them. The Saudi Arabian relation needs to be developed much more. We don't know when Trump will dump Saudi Arabia, so we should take that opportunity. And India should emerge not as a South Asian country, as you correctly said, or all the time worrying about bilateral problems. We should now start thinking in terms of multilateral problems and playing a role in that. And if we go to the UN, we should never speak about Kashmir and never speak about Pakistan. We should pretend it doesn't exist. So that way we can develop a profile which is necessary. And I think your book, for me reading it, filled in gaps which were large, and you have covered a ground right from the beginning to the end. And so I hope you write one more book.
Sir Kumaraswamy, please take that advice seriously. So, may I now request Ambassador Sanjay Singh to give his comments.
Dr. Swamy, Professor Jagadesh Kumar, Ms. Sagarika Ghosh, Professor Kumaraswamy, thank you very much for inviting me to JNU today. I always am delighted whenever I come to your institution, even though I never studied. I used to study physics, and at that time there was no such course. But Dr. Muddassir, Kumar, between you and Professor Kumaraswamy, you are the two most premier scholars studying West Asia in India today. And I'm so glad that you are focused on India's Saudi policy. Now, Saudi Arabia, as everybody knows, and I'm talking to the students here, is that it is a G20 country. It's a major storehouse of oil and gas, even though we get no gas from them, because the Saudis have made it a policy to use the gas only domestically. We have around 3 million Indians there, as Dr. Swamy talked about, and there is a great need for scholarship in the area of understanding Saudi Arabia and studying how our policy vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia has evolved. And I think it will help the practitioners more, perhaps as much as the scholars of the subject, as to what is the basis of our engagement with Saudi Arabia, what is the historical basis. We always talk about civilizational basis. I was reminded about what kind of relationship existed during the time of the Mughals. I'm told, I might be wrong, and Muddassir may correct me, but no Mughal emperor ever went on Hajj. It's a strange phenomenon, because the Mughal emperors felt that the center of the world was here in Delhi, in India. So things have evolved since then, and the 1973 crisis after the Yom Kippur War increased the prosperity of the Gulf kingdoms and made a complete change in the relative balance between the Gulf and India in terms of economics. Now, I've only glanced through the book, which is, I'm so glad, is arranged in a thematic manner, rather than in as a kind of period. It's a thematic manner. The Nehru era, drifting apart, Islamic dimension, Pakistan factor, Palestine factor, the transformation, international factors, energy, economic, and migration. Now, as you students will, if you read this book, and I hope you do, you will see, it explains the choices India has made at various stages of our journey of cooperation or engagement with Saudi Arabia. Now, you can always look back in hindsight and say, oh, that was wrong. But was there an objective reality that you had to deal with when you were making those choices? And that is why, you see, it's never good to look back at history and say, I would have done better, because you are using your own frame of reference as today to look back at what is happening. So what I like the students to do is to use these chapters and see and analyze them and go further beyond it and see, maybe you could write a PhD dissertation on it, whether the choice was a good choice or not, and whether it was the only choice that could be made then. Now, the book points out that our engagement with Saudi Arabia has been episodic. You know, you have initially King Saud coming here in 1955, Saudi Arabia attending the Bandung Conference, Saudi Arabia being a founder member of non-aligned movement. Then what happens? Nehru goes there in 1956, but then Nehru had to make a choice. And a choice he made was for the Republican Pan-Arabism Egypt. And Egypt and Saudi Arabia clashed in Yemen. So, if you look back and said, was Nehru right to make this choice? Or could he have hedged it? So, these are questions that as students you'll have to think about, because practitioners like me, when we work, we don't have the time to think about it. We take an objective reality as it exists and take immediate decisions. Right or wrong is for scholars like you to decide on it later on. Now, after that, you mention in your book about how Indian Nawabs and kings contributed to the upkeep of the Kaaba. The charter for the Kaaba used to go from Hyderabad, but no longer, because of the relative change in the prosperity of the two regions. Now, Professor Swamy mentioned about perhaps oil, what will happen to oil in the future. And he talked about, I was asking our expert on energy politics, Yasi Samina, that if battery technology comes in and storage technology comes in, will we need oil? And then what happens to the prices of oil? And there's again another shift take place in the relationship. So these are things that as scholars you'll have to think about when we take decisions. Now, it's very easy now to say that we should have taken a choice. And Professor Kumar started mentioning Professor Swamy, Dr. Swamy saying, why didn't we take a choice in choosing Israel? Good question. In 1973, after the oil price increase led to increasing prosperity, and we were a very autarkic economy, we didn't have foreign exchange, could we have taken a choice at that stage in favor of Israel, or even equidistant to Israel, when we are so dependent on energy resources coming from the Muslim countries of West Asia? Now, again, this is looking back in hindsight, but you have to examine, did we have the choice to make that choice? Once again, as has been mentioned by the speakers, that 1991 liberalization and the enormous growth of the Indian economy has again changed the framework under which we deal with. And I've always wondered, when I used to deal with this region in the Foreign Office, as to put myself in the shoes of the other side. and see how does India appear to them. So if you look from the Musandam Peninsula, which is the easternmost tip of the Arabian Peninsula in Oman, you'd see this huge behemoth 200 kilometers away across the sea. 1.2 billion people, a huge market which takes in around 20 to 25% of their total export of oil and gas, enormously militarily powerful, has the most modern technologies, and is a nuclear power. So how would you view this country? So would you want, if you had a rational decision-making process, you would naturally want to have relationship with this country. And that's why I was wondering if I can task you and Professor Kumaraswamy to write about Saudi's India policy. Now, this is a mirror image, because each one of them, they also have had to take choices, make choices. And would their choices would have been the same, and how the choices would evolve. And I agree with you that the visit of Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh was epical. It changed, but he was standing on 10 years of growth. And I agree that Prime Minister Bajpayee took a leap of faith in taking this forward. And this culminated in the very important visit of King Abdullah 5 years back, 5 years later, when the whole India-Saudi Arabia relationship got dehyphenated from Pakistan. And our engagement has increased considerably since then, went on increasing, and I presume it's now come to what is known as the critical mass. And I'm so glad that the present government is making use of this critical mass and taking forward our relationship, our engagement with this region forward. Now, when you deal with this region, it's very important not to deal with it from the spectacles that we wear in India of a democratic country, of a secular country. It's very important because the leaders of these countries are permanent, whereas our leadership changes every 5 years. And this has to be taken into consideration whenever you're making policies, whenever you're dealing with it. Because this, and secondly, there is also this view that Islam is monolithic. It isn't. It isn't. And the view of, say, Islam from India, of the Islam which is there in the Gulf, you can have a lot of contradictions. So it is very facile, very easy to say that yes, we will deal with the Gulf on this basis. It's not, because Islam in India is Indian in the end. And this is very important to understand. Finally, again, there's a mention about, in your book, about the navigation that we'll have to perform between sectarianism, between the rivalry between Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and what Professor Swamy mentioned about Israel. Now, somewhere you say, is the Palestine question now completely on the back burner? Will it never resurrect itself? I give you the 300 million people, the collective angst of them, of having not been able to overcome a 10 million population country. Will it go away? Now this is something that we have to keep in the back of our mind. But that is a different issue. India needs peace and stability in that region. That is our objective. We don't want to break eggs there and try and put them together as some of our worthy friends have done or tried to do. Now, the trick will be how not to have bloodshed at the table when we get Iran, Saudi Arabia and Israel in the same table. And that is going to be, for India, what it takes, and it will take finesse, it will take thought, and it will take a proactive policy. But that is what we'll have to do ultimately. And recently at the Raisina conference, you would have noticed that Foreign Minister Zarif, and addressing, had talked about a regional dialogue. I think these are some ideas that India, as a great power, has to take forward. I thank you very much for calling me here. I'm delighted with the publication of this book, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sanjay Singh. You mentioned about battery technology, and Dr. Swamy mentioned about hydrogen fuel cells. Since there are students of international studies here, and since I come from technology background, let me give a word of caution that during last 150 years, the advances that have taken place in energy storage, particularly batteries, they are far few compared to what you see in semiconductor technology or automobile industry, space technology. And today the most efficient battery technology depends on lithium ions. And there are only 3 countries which have significant deposits of lithium. So unless you develop other modes of energy storage, other materials for battery manufacturing, we may again be dependent on few countries in the world. So you need to be very careful about it.
That's an escape from that.
Yeah, may I now request Sagarika Ghosh to make a few brief comments.
Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Subramanian Swamy, respected Ambassador Sanjay Singh, Honorable Chairman, Professor Jagadesh Kumar, Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal University, our most valued authors, Professor Kumaraswamy and Dr. Muddassir, esteemed invited guests and students. It's my privilege to have this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of Springer Nature, produced, delivered and consumed. To realize this promise, it is therefore essential for authors and societies to partner with the publisher who can actually deliver on the promises of these new opportunities. Over the last decade, we have led the publishing industry in embracing this new digital technology, meeting technological challenges, and in pioneering new products to create more opportunities for our authors to reach more audience. Springer Nature was created in May 2015 through an integration of Nature Publishing House, who publishes the most highly respected and prestigious nature journals, Walgrave Macmillan Education, and Springer Volume. And this strategic merger brought together these dynamic publishing houses, each having more than 175 years of history behind them and a shared vision to advance knowledge and learning around the world. Today we publish more than 12,000 book titles combining all disciplines, of course, from clinical medicine, engineering, mathematics, statistics, economics, hard sciences, and applied sciences as well. And we can actually give our authors this kind of dissemination platform that we sell our books in e-book packages, and that goes to some 14,000 universities and libraries all over the world. So I must say that it has been a pleasure associating with Professor Kumaraswamy and Dr. Kumar. This book, India-Saudi Policy Bridge to the Future, is published under our Walgrave Macmillan imprint. It is particularly important as it studies the historical evolution of India's understanding of and policy towards the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and presents the first comprehensive work on Indo-Saudi relations. It has already generated some meaningful discussion in the fraternity, as we can see from the citations and the download figures of the book as published on the book homepage. You are all invited to check that. I must also say that this book enhances the value of our program, which contains interdisciplinary and rigorous research from leading scholars, practitioners, politicians, policymakers in the field of business, economics, political science, and international relations. As a publisher, we truly feel that we are fortunate to be able to play a critical role in publishing, disseminating, highlighting, and placing important research into context of researchers and societies at large by publishing books like The Dictionary of Economics, which was published in 1894 and is online in from 2008, and it includes contributions from 31 Nobel Prize winners. The market-leading international political economy series, which Polgar Macmillan is publishing now over 3 decades. The award-winning Polgar Studies in European Union Politics series. The Polgar Studies in International Relations, which is the official publication of European International Studies Association. The International Economic Association series, which we are publishing since 1952. So a big thank you to our authors. And I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our chief guest, Professor Subramanian Swamy, for his talk explaining the importance of this book, and grateful to Ambassador Sanjay Singh for such an insightful talk. Especially, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, sir, for chairing this event and supporting such great research here. Finally, our collaboration with Professor Kumaraswamy. He's simply a great honor, great author, I must say. And I fondly remember our days of discussion, and I think that I must have shown a lot of perseverance to convince him that we are the right publisher for his research work. Thank you, sir, for having this confidence in us. And we are also honored to be publishing his book series, The Persian Gulf, that is the official publication of Middle East Institute, and we have already published the first series and also the handbook of Hafnite of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Lastly, I would like to say that we are having the 20% discount flyer for this book, which is available with my colleague Sanjay, and you can all ensure that you are procuring a copy and placing an order for this book. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sir. Let us conclude our program with a vote of thanks. And also thanks to Dr. Swamy for coming to JNU in a cheerful mood, not in a combative mood.